Timothy, how would you gauge Ukraine's vulnerability at this moment?
I think in a way, it's a mistake for us to define it as Ukraine's vulnerability, because what's happened in the last 3 years or so is that Ukraine has taken all of our vulnerabilities upon itself. We forget that. We define Ukraine as a problem, when in fact Ukraine has been a solution. It's the Ukrainians who have been defending a rules-based world order. It's the Ukrainians who have been showing that nuclear blackmail doesn't have to work, and in that sense, deterring nuclear proliferation. It's the Ukrainians who have been showing the Chinese how difficult offensive operations are, and thereby deterring them. It's the Ukrainians who have been fulfilling essentially the entire NATO mission all by themselves with a certain amount of assistance from their allies. All of those are things that the Ukrainians have done. So of course, if we let Ukraine lose, Ukrainians are going to suffer. But I think the part that we have to remember, talking about this from a distance, is that the whole world order, whether we're talking about nuclear weapons, deterring China, international law, depends on how this turns out.
I appreciate the distinction you're making there, but I raise the issue, of course, because Donald Trump has been pretty clear, Lucan, in saying he's certainly not going to go to bat for Ukraine the way Joe Biden has. So thus the question about feeling vulnerable at the moment. What do you say?
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, Ukraine is made vulnerable by Trump. I think there's a hope within Ukraine that, because of Trump's unpredictability, that he will that they will be able to convince him to change his mind. But I agree that that's unlikely. But I want to, just second Tim's point that a lot of people see this war as kind of about Ukraine, and in that, that's really not sort of in our sort of interest or doesn't really affect us directly. But I think the point is that, if Russia is allowed to win in Ukraine, it will start attacking the rest of Europe, obviously the Baltics, Eastern Europe, but even more broadly, that if Russia succeeds, we will return to an era not too long ago, 70 or 80 years ago, when countries regularly invaded one another because they had territorial designs on their neighbors. So in other words, we have to think, so what's at stake is much bigger than Ukraine. It's much bigger than Putin, than Russia. It affects, obviously, Taiwan. It affects, nuclear proliferation. So if we don't defend Ukraine, these smaller countries that face attacks, what are they going to do? They're going to get nuclear weapons.